Hey guys. This is what if Naruto was in Kimetsu no Yaiba. No matter where he found himself, one truth remained: the world was a cruel, dark place. A fighter since his youth, death and loss was all he ever knew. And now, stranded in another world, he faces a new reality. One not too different from the one he'd left behind. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 1. Will you play with me? Susumaru could feel it. Blood. This man's blood, coursing through human veins, through mortal arteries and capillaries, raging, powerful, and brimming with life. In the dark of night, his flesh called to her, beckoned to her, and it was a sweet aroma that made her mouth water and her legs quiver. Deep within the forest, a blond man stood alone. He leaned against a tree with a sober expression, gazing at the glimmering stars above. Even beneath a suit and tie, his frame was strong, athletic, sculpted through years of physical activity. He was a bit above average height, just under 6 feet. His visage was young, barely that of a 20-year-old. His cheeks were whiskered, birthmarks etched across his comely features. It almost pained her to think that she would soon end this young man's life. Almost. She smiled hungrily, eager to tear him apart. A bag was at his side, stuffed to the brim with various plants and herbs. In his hand was a thick book. After a moment of looking up, he swiftly took a pen and began to sketch. Susumaru, the spectator, the hunter, stalked her blonde-haired, blue-eyed prey. The blood that this man possessed was different. It felt different. It sounded different from any other person she had ever devoured. For several minutes, the demon had slowly followed him. She had trailed the blonde until they were in a secluded area, where she could take her time with him. She was quaking with bloodlust. And now, it was time to act. Normally, she would use her temari balls to end her foes, turning them into chunks of meat. But not this one. She wanted to keep him intact, wanted to hear his pained screams as she devoured him bit by painful bit. Oh, how she could not wait to taste his blood, the very blood that had called to her the moment she laid eyes on him. Susumaru's hands shook, then clenched into fists. Her claws lengthened, sharp. Her menacing fangs burst forward, and somehow, she knew this would be her finest meal yet. But before she could make a move, the blond man suddenly stirred. He stopped sketching. You know, you're not as quiet as you think you are. Susumaru froze, a sudden chill running down her spine. Had she been spotted? She remained still for time, wondering if he had truly seen her slinking through the forest. A wall of green separated them, hiding her entire body from sight. Demon, I'm talking to you, the blonde repeated, turning to her exact location. Come on, no need to hide. Let's get this over with. She snarled with prideful anger, emerging from behind a tree. She said no words to him. She moved with purpose in her steps, walking, then running, then sprinting, thundering toward this calm human. She closed the distance between them in an instant, claws outstretched, jaws exposing brutal fangs. She hoped to see horror in the blonde's eyes. But instead she saw nothing. No fear. Not even surprise. And then, a fist plowed into her face. She was halted mid-sprint. A sickening crunch echoed through the forest as her nose and teeth were shattered. Another fist drove into her stomach, and she retched, falling to her knees. Another strike landed, a vicious kick. She felt her ribs snap beneath the force of his leg. And the final blow to the sternum sent her flying 20 meters backwards. She rolled against the dirt, stopping only as her back struck a nearby tree. Susumaru could taste blood in her mouth. Not the blood of her foe, but her own. She shuddered, clutching her ribs tightly. Pain swam down her body. The demon whimpered as she slowly sat up. She could not move her arm. Her jaw and nose had been broken. Her ribs most likely shattered to pieces. By a mere human. The blond man observed her for a moment, then he drew closer, taking deliberate steps. It was then that Susumaru looked into his eyes, a vibrant blue that mirrored the sea. There was no hesitation, no tentativeness in gaze. Suddenly, she was afraid. This being wasn't human. He couldn't be. Yet vibrant blood still coursed through his veins. His flesh and organs called to her, begging to be devoured. He didn't have Kibutsuji's aura, so he couldn't have been a demon. A demon slayer, perhaps? No, couldn't be. He hadn't used a Nichiren sword. Only brute strength. Susumaru shrunk back as the blonde stood before her. He leaned forward. You're not the first one, you know. He sighed, staring down at her. He looked tired, weary, and sad. She could feel her wounds healing. What are you talking about? The young man scratched his whiskered cheeks. They always come. Your kind. They're drawn to me. Like moths to a flame. Just who are you? Susumaru probed, buying time, waiting for her body to recover. A shinobi, an artist, and believe it or not, I'm also a doctor. The blonde listed. He counted on his fingers with a pleasant smile. Sure, shinobi? She panted. Her ribs began to mend themselves. It was a swift, yet painful process. What the fuck is that? You don't know? I could have sworn there were shinobi in this world. He chuckled, then crossed his arms. But you know, it's very annoying. His expensive suit was ruined, stained with blood. Her blood. When you demons attack me, I really don't like it. The blonde sighed again. Some have even tried it in broad daylight, only for them to burn alive. Probably young, inexperienced demons. Recently turned by the sound of it. She laughed humorlessly, wheezing in agony. With a group as old as yours, you'd think the older demons would take better care of the young. Fully recovered, Susumaru snarled. Guess it's not in our nature. She lunged forward, aiming for the man's skull. Me'll be damned. She threw 2 tamari balls, hoping to turn his head into chunks of meat. But he deflected them with the ease of swatting a fly. And terror befell her. She felt a hand wrap around her neck, slamming her against a tree so harshly that wood splintered and cracked against her spine. The lumbering trunk groaned, snapping. It soon gave way, falling to the forest floor with a mighty thud. She cried out in pain as she was lifted by the throat, legs dangling like a doll. This time, he had broken her lower spine, rendering her limbs useless. And her ribs, once again shattered, pierced her lungs from within. You're not a monster, you know, the blonde whispered, powerful hands clenched around the demon's throat. I can see it in your eyes. You think you are, but you're not. He pulled out a strange knife, twirling it with a finger. An ethereal glow surrounded his weapon, distorting the very space around it. It wasn't a Nichiren blade, but she just knew it had the power to kill her. Or at least, do some permanent damage. She trashed against his hold, completely overcome by fear, something she hadn't felt in a long time. She wondered, would this man decapitate her, or wait for the sun, finally ending her eternal life? She stopped struggling, gasping out. I am a monster, she said pitifully. The blonde's grip loosened, and Susumaru fell to the forest floor. She didn't try to escape. She couldn't. He took a knee. I haven't been alive for as long as you have, but trust me, I've seen real monsters. The kind of monsters with the power to kill untold thousands of people at once. But you? You killed to satisfy a hunger you cannot control. From the ground, Susumaru grit her teeth. Tears burned at her eyes. She was angry, humiliated, frustrated, and afraid. So very afraid. Because she was going to die. A fact at this point. Outmatched, outclassed. She was at this man's mercy. And in the face of death, something peculiar began to take place. She slowly remembered her former life. It was almost as though a veil had been lifted, and the memories came flowing in. She remembered her family, long since dead. Her older sister, who had always played ball with her when she'd been a child. She remembered all the people that had died because of her, including her father, mother, and sisters. Their screams, their cries. And she remembered the day she had been turned into a demon, against her will. You don't understand anything, she said, tears staining her pale face, a sob on her lips. The image of her family was clear as day, and she hated herself more than ever. I do understand, the blonde spoke softly. More than you know. Why you're going to kill me? Susumaru whispered, accepting her fate. She was a mess. A crying, sniveling mess. What a way to die, she thought. A predator at the feet of her former prey. For a moment, it seemed like the blonde considered letting her die. But he frowned, lost in a sea thought. Then he stood up, twirling his blade once more. You won't die. Not yet. Not until the sun rises, he spoke, grasping her chin between his fingers, so that she could look him in the eyes. His hold was so gently, so warm. When was the last time someone had touched her? You might think you're a monster. Everyone might say that you are. But only you can decide what you are, who you want to be. His words rang fiercely in ears, challenging all that she had believed since becoming a demon. What? She began quietly. What's your name? He smiled faintly. Naruto. Naruto, she repeated. And yours? Susumaru. Okay, Susumaru. Here's what will happen. I'm going to give you two choices, Naruto began, holding up one finger. Choice 1, give up on eating humans forever, protect them with your life, and live to atone for all the death you've caused. He held up another finger. Or choice 2, die with the rising sun. His words were piercing, sharper than any blade. There's no shame in choosing death. Susumaru shuddered at his words. Not much time remained. Dawn was approaching. She could feel it. She chanced another glimpse into his eyes, and they were cold and determined to do what he had said. In the distance, her tamari balls laid in the grass. Her hands trembled, longing to hold them, longing for a chance to play with someone. I can see that you've remembered something important, he said, turning to what she was looking at. Some demons, as they're dying, or just before dying, seem to regain some glimpses of their former human lives. It's very interesting, really. She blinked, and Naruto retrieved her tamari. He placed them in her hands, softly and tenderly. If I choose to live, will you play with me? Her voice was small, scared of his response. Despite her age, a tiny part of her mind, still childish, still immature, longed for him to say yes. Naruto paused, somewhat surprised by her request. Then he chuckled softly. Of course I will. In a moment of clarity, induced by the nearness of death, she chose to live. She did not know this man, nor was she completely certain that he would keep his promise. But when she looked at him, she couldn't help but take a gamble. I don't want to die, she whispered. I'll do it. I'll do everything you said. Naruto almost looked relieved, for he could sense no malice, no negative emotions, no deceit. So likely, she was being sincere. You won't regret this, Susumaru. Naruto took that same knife. She flinched, almost expecting him to strike. But he wasn't aiming at her. Instead, he sliced his own palm. Crimson blood flowed from his injury, dripping to the soft earth. Susumaru's mouth watered. He lifted her chin, and she parted her lips. It was only a few drops, but his blood was enough to satiate her hunger. She drank slowly, savoring a taste like no other. She felt warm, she felt wrapped in caring arms. Her body trembled, melted, tears streaming down her cheeks as the gluttonous desires of a demon began to wane. She didn't wish to eat him. Not anymore. Because his blood was all she needed. All that she desired. Chapter 2, Dr. Uzumaki. Dear gods, please, just spare my brother, he whispered. You unlike me, he's really nice. He wants to be useful, and I got in his way. As his life slipped away, he could barely make out the form of his younger twin, bloodied by the demon that appeared in the night. Yuichiro Tokito awoke to the sound of knocking, and not just any sort. It was the kind of knocking that echoed with the sound of desperation and panic. The banging was intense, so loud that it reverberated through the two-story building that comprised Naruto's clinic. His eyes opened, turquoise orbs glinting against the dull moon. Nearly sunrise, he realized. A frown marred his delicate features. He slowly rose from his futon, wondering who was banging at the door this early. Naruto? He pondered before shaking his head, dispelling the thought. His sensei had a key? Surely, he wouldn't need to knock so harshly, especially at such a time. Yuichiro groaned, then threw off his covers. He pulled on a sleeveless shirt, using his one good hand to wear his clothing. His left arm was nothing but a stump, lost to a demon attack 3 years ago. Despite this, he was still able to function properly, putting on his clothes with the utmost ease. Turning on a light, he slowly descended the stairs with a tired expression. He rubbed at his eyes, yawning as he entered the main area of the clinic. It wasn't large by any means, but comfortable enough to house a handful of patients. An examination table could be seen, lined with clean linen. Numerous medical instruments were mounted on the wall, sleek metal components reflecting the lights above. A few medical beds were in the main lobby as well. Beyond that, a hall led to 5 other rooms, each designed to house more critically ill patients. Yuichiro made his way toward the door, brows twitching as the knocking increased in volume. "I'm coming!" the teen yelled. He brushed a strand of onyx hair from his face. He would need to get a haircut soon. Once at the entrance, he could see the silhouette of 3 people behind a translucent portion of glass. Pausing for a moment, he peered out cautiously before unlocking the door. Yuichiro froze. Please!" a man exclaimed, carrying 2 children in his arms. "My children and I were attacked. They're not responding. Help us, I beg you." Yuichiro swallowed, hard. He shuddered, blood going cold as he observed the sight before him. The man appeared to be in his late 30s. He was bleeding from the scalp, his breathing heavy and labored. He carried 2 others. A boy and a girl, and their condition was far worse than his own. The boy had 5 deep scratches running from his chest to the base of his abdomen, while the girl suffered severe injuries to her leg and stomach. Her head also bled profusely, soaking her brown, lengthy locks. "Will you help us?" the man urged, panic in his voice. He looked around nervously. He was pale, and desperation colored his features. Yuichiro began. "We're a small clinic, sir. I specialize in chronic illnesses, mostly. Not traumatic injuries. But you have to know something, anything that can help them," he pressed, panting heavily with each word. "Please, you're the closest place to us. I don't think my children will make it if I go anywhere else." The black-haired teen shivered with apprehension, clenching his fist. Trepidation settled in his stomach like a stone, stunting his actions, clouding his judgment. "This is too much," he thought. "I'm still learning. I can't help them." Then an image flashed before his eyes. A memory of 3 years ago, when he had been injured, on the verge of death. He had given up on life, ready to die in a pool of his own blood, left arm severed by a vicious demon. Only, he didn't die. Someone had saved him, pulled him from the brink of death. And so, despite the uncertainty, Yuichiro gritted his teeth and opened the door, allowing the desperate man to enter. He rushed in, holding his children tightly. "Over there," Yuichiro ordered. "Put them on those 2 beds." The man complied and gently laid both children down. Yuichiro turned on the lights. He rushed to their medical cabinet, grabbing all that he could with his good arm. Clean cloths. Antiseptics. Everything he could find. He returned to the man and placed the materials on each child's bed. "Here you have 2 hands. Take this and put pressure on your daughter's wound," he ordered, focusing the father's attention on the girl. The man nodded vigorously and took the cloths from him, applying firm pressure to his daughter's abdominal region. "I'm Yuichiro. What's your name?" he asked while studying the boy's injuries. "Jiro," said the man, tears in his eyes. He continued to press into his daughter's wound. Almost instantly, the once white cloth turned red with blood. Yuichiro loosened the boy's clothing. He found that his wounds weren't as deep as his sister's, but still life-threatening, nonetheless. "Jiro," he began, also applying pressure to the son's chest. "I want you to tell me what happened." Jiro shuddered. "I don't really know," he admitted. "We were all asleep. Me, my wife, and my children. The next thing I remember is waking up to my daughter screaming. We all rushed to her room." He took a deep, shaky breath. And there, she was being attacked by some sort of monster. I must be going mad, or something. I'd never seen anything like it. I managed to escape with my children. But my wife. You don't need to say any more, Yuichiro remarked softly. In his mind, he reached a conclusion, connecting the dots about this peculiar event. Jiro could not hold back the tears. Will my children, will they survive? I don't know, Yuichiro answered honestly. I can't do much on my own right now. I'm still learning. But my sensei should be returning soon. And if anyone can help them, it's him. Yuichiro glanced outside, through a window. Dawn was approaching, and he hoped Naruto would be returning from his latest assignment. Earlier, Tokyo was a bustling city, despite it being so early. The sun had not risen, yet the streets were filled with modest amounts of people. Workers, mostly. They trudged along the path, intent on reaching their jobs in time. All around, buildings rose into the sky, a telltale sign of Japanese industrialization. Electrical lamps illuminated the faces of many. Some looked worn, not liking the fact that they had to be up so early. Others, dressed in expensive suits, walked about with much on their minds. A few automobiles lined the city streets, reserved for the wealthiest of denizens. As Naruto moved, many eyes seemed to be drawn to him. Or perhaps, they were staring at the passenger on his back, her arms curled tightly around his neck. Though he had been here for almost 3 years, Naruto still found it peculiar that he could not sense a drop of chakra. It was jarring at first, realizing that he was the only one of his kind, but he had since grown accustomed to it, and he learned to ignore the strange feeling that came with knowing that he was utterly alone. Strangely enough, the world, nature itself, still pulsed with the energy of life. From the grass, to the trees, to the lakes and streams, natural energy was as abundant here as it had been in the elemental nations, untapped and forever unreachable by the people of this world. He took in a breath, then gazed at the cloudless sky. 3 years, he mused. Nearly 3 years since his defeat, and the guilt of it all still weighed heavily on his mind. He had failed, inadvertently abandoning those he had sworn to protect. It was a great burden, one that never ceased to permeate his thoughts. However, instead of falling into a pit of despair, he found something to do, something to keep himself occupied, even as he strived for a way back home. Here, he was a doctor, and though his skills in medicine were nothing compared to the 5th Hokage, his ability to help the sick was almost godlike in a world without chakra. He wondered what Sakura would think. He chuckled to himself. Years ago, she had insisted on teaching him medical ninjutsu. Being the bonehead that he was, he questioned her motives. He was a fighter, a fuinjutsu user. Not a medic. Hell, he healed quicker than most. So, of course, there was no reason to learn. But she'd convinced him, stating that, if he wouldn't learn for himself, then perhaps he should learn for the sake of others, in the event that he needed to save someone's life. Reluctantly, he agreed, soon falling in love with the field of medicine. He even sought out Tsunade to teach him, further boosting his knowledge. And now, stranded in a country where illness and injury claimed the lives of many, he was grateful to Sakura for fostering this skill within him. He was no miracle worker, but he had saved more lives than he cared to count, thanks to the instance of a friend. I'm sorry, Sakura. She died, protecting him during the end of the war. Naruto frowned, dark thoughts rising from the depths of his heart. But then, Susumaru stirred in his arms. Still on his back, she stiffened as she came to, amber eyes growing wide as she found herself being carried by the very man she had tried to devour. She had been so quiet, he had almost forgotten she was with him. Since her vow at the forest, since drinking his blood, she had fallen asleep for what seemed like the first time in decades. Her breathing quickened when she awoke in full. Finally awake? Naruto remarked, smiling a bit. Her pale features burned red, and she was unable to find the right words. She remembered everything clearly. The forest. Their fight. Her utter humiliation and defeat. His kindness. And his blood. The thought of it made her body tingle. Even though a multitude of people walked by, the desire she once had to attack them was gone. Well, not entirely. She was still a demon, after all. But these people paled in comparison to the man carrying her. His blood was unique, more so than even those who possessed mere chi. So different in fact that it felt otherworldly. It had satisfied her in a way she never knew possible, cleared her thoughts of the ravenous haze that clouded the mind of a demon. Hi, she finally replied, then cursed a pitiful sound that left her lips. Naruto laughed a bit. This is strange, isn't it? He said after a moment. Susumaru regarded the back of his spiky mane, still stricken with wonder by this whole situation. Why, yeah, she spoke. I'm not sure what to say. You beat me half to death. I think you also saved me. A thank you doesn't seem like much. But if you'll accept one then. You're welcome, Naruto cut in. He turned to face her, sapphire eyes glinting warmly. You're right though. A thank you isn't enough. Don't forget the promise you made to me. Susumaru nodded slowly. Her black hair was still stained with blood, now matted and dried. In fact, portions of her clothes were ruined. Her orange kimono was torn in many areas, too. However, Naruto had since covered her with his black suit, wrapped snuggle around her shoulders. They walked in silence for a time. Since tasting his blood, she'd felt tired. She hadn't slept in ages, and the mere fact she dozed off shocked her as much as her effortless defeat by his hand. She didn't know what it was, but something inside her felt different. Naruto? Why did give me that choice? Susumaru asked quietly. Why not just let me die? I attacked you. I wanted to kill you. To eat you. He pondered her words, all the while keeping track of time. I felt compassion for you, Naruto admitted. I've killed many demons, even more than some demon slayers, in fact. But something about you made me rethink just letting you die. And what was that? Naruto paused. I can't really explain it. She slumped on his shoulders, unsure of whether her proximity to him was appropriate. He didn't complain, so she remained still, resting her chin near his neck. The scent of his hair was nice, calming. You were right. I remember my life before being turned, she said sadly. Man, I was such an idiot. I can't believe my parents and siblings put up with me for so long. She took in a shaky breath. I should have listened. I wouldn't have been turned if I hadn't gone out that night. I really messed up. We all make mistakes, he offered. All we can do is look to the future and learn from the past. Yeah? She whispered, stretching out her hand. A temari materialized on her palm, before promptly disappearing. I guess that's true. Naruto turned a corner, moving down a new street. They reached a different part of the city. It wasn't an opulent area, nor was it poverty-stricken. It looked nice, comfortable, homely. Are you human? She ventured. Yeah. Why do you ask? Because you beat me. Effortlessly. I've seen demon slayers fight, but not like the way you do. I'm different, he supplied. She thought for a moment. You're also a doctor. I am, he said. Susumaru tilted her head. How old are you then? I'm 19. Really? You're so young, she marveled, amber eyes growing wide. And as they approached a new street, Naruto suddenly stopped walking. He turned to look at her once again. His gaze was kind, but firm. I just want to make things clear, Naruto began. His voice was more serious than usual. I can't trust you entirely at the moment, if I'm being honest. Don't take this personally, but for the foreseeable future, you will be under my watch. If you regress, even by one step, if you attack anyone, if you lay even a scratch on an innocent person, I will make sure your life ends, you understand? Eyes lowered, a silent nod was her response, and he continued to move. Naruto knew it was harsh, but he had to lay down the rules. She was a demon, one he had chosen to keep alive. She was his responsibility, his burden. Perhaps he was making a grave mistake by doing this. Harboring a demon? Utterly unthinkable. But like Tamayo had shown him, some demons were still capable of good, in spite of past actions. I don't think you have to worry about me attacking someone, she said after a bit of silence. A blush tinted her cheeks as she gazed at him. Your blood, it's so different from his. They stumbled into a commotion on the way to the clinic. As early as it was, a small crowd was gathering, and many police officers surrounded the area. Wielding batons, they kept the people at bay, all while inspecting the scene. Naruto glanced at his timepiece, and realized it was nearly 5:30 in the morning. With one hand, he carried a briefcase filled with medical supplies. With the other, he supported Susumaru, who still clung to him tightly. The sun would be up in a matter of minutes, but the scene of destruction caught his gaze the instant he saw it. He stopped to inspect the commotion. He maneuvered through the throng of people, reaching a scene that made him frown. A few buildings were damaged, almost as though a tornado had ripped through them. Shattered glass and splintering would litter the street, forming a path of destruction too unnatural to ignore. Worse yet, the sight of a few mangled bodies was visible. Notable was a black-haired woman, literally torn apart like a slaughtered animal. Her eyes were hollow, mouth still open as though screaming in agony. Susumaru stiffened, a chill running through her. The presence that lingered in the air was a powerful one. Familiar, too. Naruto glanced at her, a curious brow raised. A bolt of panic flashed upon her face. Her heart began to race as a fearful thought came to her. Obviously, this was the work of a demon. It was clear as day, judging by the very nature of the destruction. Seeing this, would he change his mind about letting her live? I had nothing to do with this, she said quickly, tone hushed yet apprehensive. I never said you did, he replied. This seems to have happened recently. You were with me the whole time. You're not responsible for the actions of others, Susumaru. Why yes, sorry, she whispered. A police officer came up to them, directing Naruto away from the carnage. Sir, for your own safety, please stay back, he ordered. Naruto looked apologetic, facing the man clad in uniform. I apologize, officer. I'm just checking for survivors. He put his briefcase down. See, I'm a doctor, and I own a clinic several minutes from here. I'm willing to help if there's any need. His eyes lit up with recognition. Oh, you're Dr. Uzumaki, aren't you? I don't live in this part of the city, but I've heard about you all over Tokyo. They say that a single touch of your hands is enough to heal the sick. Naruto waved him off. You flatter me, sir. I'm just doing what I can to help those in need. Of course, said the man, before returning to the topic at hand. But as of now, there are 4 victims, none of which survived. It's terrible, really. All of them were viciously attacked in their own homes. I can't imagine the type of people that would do such a thing. He swallowed, glancing around. Makes you wonder if those tales about demons are true. Anyway, neighbors do claim that the husband and children of a female victim fled the scene. Though I'd advise against staying here any longer, Uzumaki-san. Susumaru kept her face hidden from view, guilty and ashamed of the fact that she had also done such things before. Was she truly deserving of this second chance? Is she doing okay? The officer asked. Naruto glanced at Susumaru, whose eyes were dull and crestfallen. He gave the man a small smile before leaving the area. She'll be fine. She's just a bit tired, Naruto said. Take care, officer. Moving through the gathering spectators, Naruto picked up the pace. He followed a peculiar trail of blood leading away from the scene. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. Then he promptly broke into a sprint, a surprised Susumaru holding on tighter than ever as the world began to shift and blur. Naruto arrived at the clinic in seconds, barging through the front doors. Susumaru could smell blood the moment they entered. She shivered as the scent wafted through the air, reaching her highly attuned senses. Her fangs lengthened and her claws sharpened against her will. Her heart rate quickened as she was assaulted by the very thoughts and feelings she had vowed to leave behind. The sheer amount of blood triggered her demonic instincts. Tremors racked her body without remorse. She tightly shut her eyes, even as her mouth watered with subconscious desire. She clung to Naruto, burying her face into the nape of his neck. She expected him to recoil, expected to see a disgusted look on his face. But instead, she felt a palm on her hand, a small yet comforting gesture that eased the turmoil within her mind. Mustering the strength, she willed her fangs and claws to retreat. Her tremors dulled and her breathing slowed to reasonable pace. "You're okay," he mouthed, hands still upon hers. In the main area, Yuichiro looked up as Naruto finally entered, relief in his eyes. "Naruto!" he cried, his only arm stained with blood. Next to him, another man was present, holding a crimson cloth to a girl's abdomen. "Wait, who's that?" "That's not important right now, Yui," Naruto supplied, letting Susumaru off his back. She wobbled on shaky legs, and Naruto reached out to steady her. Finding her balance, Susumaru smiled a bit. "Thanks. I'm alright." "Okay," Naruto said softly. "The sun's rising. I want you to head to the basement. Follow the hallway. There are 4 rooms. You can stay in the first one to the right." Susumaru complied and quickly left, casting one last glance at Naruto and the situation he now found himself in. With that taken care of, he turned to the patients under his roof. As suspected, the husband had fled with his children, finding aid instead of waiting for help to come to him. Naruto rolled up his sleeves and took off his watch. He washed his hands thoroughly, then strolled to main treatment area with a calm, collected expression, taking a deep breath as he assessed the situation. 3 people. 2 males. 1 female. 2 children. "Took you long enough," muttered Yuichiro, smiling with relief. He turned to the other man in the room. "Jiro, this is Dr. Uzumaki, the owner of this clinic. He's here to help." Naruto regarded the man with a warm gaze. "I apologize for not being here sooner, Jiro. You've done well. Please let me take over from here." The man quickly nodded, relinquishing his hold on his daughter's wound. His bloodied hands shook, and exhaustion finally began settling in. He looked broken, the injury to his temple trickling a moderate amount of blood. He sat on the nearest bed, gazing on with apprehension. "How long has it been since they arrived?" Naruto inquired, applying firm pressure to the girl's abdomen. "Less than 15 minutes, Yuichiro said. I inspected them, and she has the most serious injuries, followed by the son." He paused. "I'm sorry I couldn't do much to help them." Naruto shook his head. "Stop that, Yui. Your quick thinking bought them more time that they desperately needed." The blonde shinobi halted his pressure on the daughter. As soon as he did, fountains of blood began to flow from a deep puncture wound, located on the left lower quadrant of her abdomen. He frowned. The depth of her injury wasn't reassuring. But he'd make it work. She'd live. Glancing down, he also noticed her left leg, just below the knee, was damaged beyond repair. Thankfully, Yuichiro had tied a tourniquet around her leg, halting even worse bleeding. Finally assessing the situation, he summoned a shadow clone to gather supplies. Behind them, Jiro's jaws opened with shock. His head spun. He rubbed at his eyes, confused and questioning his sanity. The second copy of Naruto, knowing what to do, found what was needed: more clean linen, a container of saline solution, sutures, scalpels, a surgical saw, and many, many bandages. He quickly got to work, cleaning the daughter's wound with saline. She moaned in protest, tears in her eyes as a wail left her lips. "It's okay, sweetheart," Naruto soothed. He placed a hand on her head. A green glow seemed to surround his palm, and the cut on her forehead slowly began to close. She fell unconscious once more. "Yuichiro," Naruto said. "Start cleaning the son's wounds. I'll get to him soon." His clone handed the younger boy the saline solution and clean clothes before promptly disappearing in a puff of smoke. Naruto wiped the sweat from his brow and began the difficult procedure. Again, he focused. His chakra spiked, then compressed, flowing into his arms, then his hands, then his fingers. He hovered his palms just above the daughter's stomach. Then he released a controlled stream of energy, targeting the epicenter of her wound. And slowly, painstakingly, her abdominal injury began to mend, stitched together with incredible precision. From connective tissue to skin, the bleeding slowed over a period of time. To the layman, he was performing a miracle, an act of the gods. But to those adept in the practice of medical ninjutsu, the act of healing an injury was down to a specific science. His chakra, refined and controlled, acted as a catalyst, stimulating the cells of the body, forcing their rate of division to increase exponentially. A wound that would take weeks of cell division to repair, when guided by him, could be healed in a matter of minutes. However, he also had to be cautious. He had to monitor and adjust the rate of division, lest the human cells run rampant and trigger the formation of cancer cells, further exacerbating the issue. Some time passed before Naruto halted the flow of chakra. Sweat slid down his face, his features paler than usual. Inspecting her wound, he concluded she was no longer at death's door. Not completely healed, but close enough. He patched her wound with the bandages at hand, before looking to her leg. Sadly, it was too damaged for him to do anything, with sections of calf outright missing, bitten off by the demon that attacked her. It would need to be amputated, hence the surgical saw his clone had retrieved. But that could wait. He turned his attention to the son, who Yuichiro had finished prepping. Naruto washed his hands once more before getting to work. The boy's injuries were different. His plight comprised of deep lacerations, running from his chest to abdomen, 5 marks shaped like claws. Get the sutures ready, he instructed Yuichiro. The black-haired teen nodded. He gathered the sterile material and kept them at the ready. Across from Naruto, Yuichiro watched the process with wide, attentive eyes. The abilities his sensei possessed never ceased to amaze him. It was always fascinating, and the sheer focus it took was even more amazing. Normally, Naruto was playful, mischievous, and somewhat clumsy. Hell, on a normal day, he forgot the location of most of their medical supplies. But that side of him always seemed to disappear when faced with situations like this. Yuichiro glanced at his missing left arm. Just as he was helping these children, Naruto had done the same to him almost 3 years ago. Naruto healed the deeper layers of the boy's cuts, before closing them with the sutures. He worked swiftly and efficiently, approximating all 5 lacerations with steady hands and masterful fingers. The boy, unconscious, showed little protest. Finally finished, he let loose a breath. Even after years of doing this, he still felt nervous. No matter how many people he operated on, the weight of knowing he held the life of another person in his hands was still heavy and humbling. Inspecting his work, Naruto's gaze grew distant, wistful. Tsunade would have done this in half the time. "You okay?" Yuichiro inquired. Naruto seemed a bit pale, eyes glazed. He grinned, brushing off the concern. "Of course, Yui. Why wouldn't I be?" The teen shrugged. "I don't know. You just seem tired." "Well, it is dawn," he replied. Glancing outside, he watched as the sun rose, streaming through open windows. Yuichiro brushed a strand of hair from his face. He really needed a haircut. "What took you so long, anyway? I thought your trip was only supposed to take a day." "You know how these things are," Naruto replied. He washed his hands for the 3rd time, then made his way to the girl, still unconscious, still breathing. Her father watched closely. He was relieved, noticing that his children were now in stable condition. It was a small town, overrun with illness. After treating as many people as I could, I decided to stick around and help investigate the cause of the plague. "And the woman?" Yuichiro asked, eyes narrowing. Naruto half smiled. "We'll talk about it later." Because one more thing remained, amputating this poor child's leg. Naruto frowned deeply. Yuichiro fared worse, a deep sadness crossing his features. Because, just like this girl, he had lost a part of himself to those wretched demons. "I'm sorry, Jiro," Naruto said gently, turning to face the man. "Your daughter's leg is too damaged for us to save. The only thing I can do now is remove it and prevent any infection. It's unfortunate, and I wish I could do more to help." Jiro, still remorseful, smiled a bit. Though his head spun, and his skull pounded, he had been lucid enough to see that these two had saved his children's lives. Sure, Keiko would be devastated by the loss of her limb, but she would still live. She would still grow up alongside her brother. "That's okay, doctor," whispered the man. "I'm grateful to you for saving them." Yuichiro noticed the dazed look in Jiro's eyes. He quickly moved to the man's side and helped him into the empty bed. Blood still flowed from the cut on his temple, dripping down his cheek. "You have a concussion," Yuichiro explained. "I'm going to need you to lay down." The father didn't protest, even as Yuichiro began dressing his wound. Naruto, now ready to finish the remaining task, picked up the surgical saw. He grimaced, taking no pleasure in this final act. Under normal circumstances, it was far from a pleasant experience. But not with him. He would make sure she barely felt a thing. He gently applied a local anesthetic, something to help numb the most affected area. Running wind chakra down the blade, Naruto separated her lower leg from the rest of her body in a fraction of a second, giving her brain little time to even register the pain. It was a clean separation, with minimal damage to surrounding nerves and tissue. Then, not a second later, he began the healing process once again, ligating major blood vessels and nerves with chakra, before finally suturing her amputated leg. "She's a demon, isn't she?" "Yeah." Yuichiro made a face. "But why? Why is she here, in the clinic?" Naruto crossed his arms, seated at his desk. He'd been writing a report concerning the event that just occurred. Documentation, how he hated it. Though he ran a private practice, he was still beholden to some rules and regulations. Because she has no other place to go. She's a demon. Since when have we ever cared about whether they had shelter or a place to stay? Since today, Naruto replied. He stopped what he was doing to give his student the utmost attention. They're flesh-hungry monsters who kill without remorse, Yuichiro continued, clenching his single fist. What about what happened today? How do we know it wasn't that demon that caused this mess? Naruto shook his head. She was with me the whole time. She's not responsible for what happened. The younger teen's eyes burned with frustration. But she's still a demon, and her kind is the cause of so much suffering. Just look at what they did to me. Because of those monsters, I've not only lost my arm, but also my brother. Muchiro, he thought sadly. He hadn't seen his younger twin in years. It doesn't matter if she's not directly responsible. Being a demon, she's just as evil as the one who hurt Jiro's family. Naruto regarded him patiently, letting him finish. He understood. Yuichiro was angry, and rightfully so. But his words were still far from rational. Just because she's a demon, she's somehow just as evil, Naruto said, repeating the teen's words. Would you say the same about Tamayo? About Yashiro? Yuichiro stiffened. No, but... They're different? Naruto finished for him. They're the good demons? Naruto stood from his chair and placed a hand on Yuichiro's shoulder. Look. I get it. Demons kill the innocent every day. Most of them deserve a horrible, painful death, right? They're the worst of the worst, the lowest form of life. But have you ever stopped to think that many demons were turned against their will? Have you ever considered that even innocent children are turned into demons? The teen was silent, fists clenched. I know, he repeated softly. He tousled his subordinate's lengthy locks. The world isn't black and white, Yuichiro. There are grays and areas of uncertainty. Don't forget that. Naruto leaned against his desk, orange tie worn loosely around his neck. Her name is Susumaru, by the way. She attacked me on my way back into the city. He frowned. She attacked you? Naruto chuckled. Yeah. You should have seen it. So sure of herself. Controlled by her demonic urges. He crossed his arms. I shattered that confidence in a second. I was going to leave her in the sun to die, like I'd done so many times before. But then, after talking to her, she cried. Actually cried. I've killed a fair amount of demons. But something about her made me decide to take a different course of action. Yuichiro heaved a tangible sigh, calming himself. I just hope you know what you're doing. When do I never? He replied, to which Yuichiro gave him an incredulous look. I'll watch her like a hawk, okay? And if she makes a move too close for comfort, I'll make sure she never gets another chance. I don't like it, said Yuichiro. But I'll trust you, sensei. Naruto groaned. Enough with the sensei already. Makes me feel old. Technically, he was still a teenager, just like Yuichiro. The younger teen cracked a smile before leaving Naruto's office. I'll be out here with the patients, sensei. The young shinobi/doctor rolled his eyes, then continued documenting. Later, he found her sitting in darkness. Susumaru was in the corner of the empty room, legs pulled into her chest. A single lamp was on, casting a dull glow upon her features. She was very pretty, he noted. Though a demon, she possessed the face of an angel. Sharp, symmetrical features and clear, unblemished skin. Her hair was just as striking, shoulder-length, obsidian locks that ended in an orange tint. Her eyes, slit like a cat's, shined as brightly as molten gold. Her clothes were still torn asunder, exposing some of her more feminine characteristics. She still held the suit jacket he'd given her, wrapping it around her body. She looked up the moment he arrived, a small book in his hand. Naruto, she whispered. Yo, he greeted, strolling to where she sat. This place is a bit empty. If you're going to be staying here, I might as well add some furniture. Maybe a bed? Some pictures. Oh, some books too. Or even a... Wait, Susumaru interrupted. Naruto paused and rose a curious brow. What's the matter? I'm not sure if this is a good idea. What isn't? Me, being here, she explained. He tilted his head. Why is that a bad thing? Because I'm a demon, she exclaimed, before quickly lowering her voice. You're a doctor. You help people. You save people. But all I've ever done is kill them. Naruto regarded her from afar, her satin features, her glistening amber orbs. Then he moved closer, sitting down in front of her. He gave her all his attention, a gesture that surprised her. I thought that your blood was everything I would need. But now, I'm not so sure anymore, Susumaru explained. You saw it. The moment we arrived at the clinic, I could hardly control myself. The scent of that much blood triggered something in me. But you didn't attack anyone though, Naruto said, looking her in the eyes. You resisted the urge to do so, despite so much fresh blood being in the air. That's only because you were there, she deflected. Naruto smiled gently. Don't sell yourself so short, Susumaru. I know for sure it wasn't just because of me that you restrained yourself. She hugged her knees tightly, gazing downward. I don't deserve this, she whispered. Why don't you? Naruto inquired, probing deeper into her thoughts. Though she was decades older than him, she acted much younger. Because I've murdered people, Naruto. Innocent people. She looked broken, eyes glistening. Then you must strive to atone for your sins all the more, he encouraged. You're still alive. You still have time. Your empathy and compassion for humans is returning. You're a demon, sure. But you can be so much more. Will this really be okay? She asked. What if I attack someone? You won't, Naruto replied. I said it earlier, didn't I? I'm here to stop you if you do. And as you know all too well, there's no way you can beat me, he teased lightly. She laughed a bit, gaze rising to meet his. Okay. He smiled. Also, there's someone I want you to meet. I'll take you to see her in a few days. She's a doctor just like me. But she reminds me of you, in a way. In what way? She asked. And Naruto's smile widened into a grin. Oh, it's a surprise. Chapter 3, You Think I'm a Demon? The sun had set hours ago, and she was outside, tending to the garden. Naruto's clinic was a modest one, not too big, not too small. His front yard, however, was quite expansive. It extended many meters, decorated with elegant flowers, winsome shrubs, and cascading fountains. He spared no expenses, transforming this area into a calm, serene location. His home could be found at the furthest reaches of town, somewhere secluded, yet still easily accessible to those in need. A full moon glinted from above, bathing the world in silver light. The center pond was especially beautiful, reflecting the celestial body that stretched across the sky. A dozen koi swam about. They circled the clear waters, aesthetically colored. Then they drew near, noticing her presence. They were hungry, it seemed. So she reached into her bag of feed, then gently tossed handfuls their way. Susumaru watched with starry eyes as the fish began to eat, blissfully unaware of the world outside their tiny home. As long as they were well fed, nothing else mattered. She moved on to another section of the garden. Wielding a pair of shears, she shaped the shrubs to the best of her ability. She focused intently, squinting as her arms glided across sections of overgrown leaves. She sliced and cut, moved back to inspect, then sliced and cut some more. She continued this for some time, all too aware of Naruto's watchful gaze. The blonde doctor was a distance away, seated on a wooden bench. As a demon, her eyesight was superb, and she could see him clearly. Naruto had a sketch pad, with a brush and ink. Upon a sheet of paper, he crafted intricate symbols that seemed like a different language. Though cheerful most of the time, he still looked sad. At certain moments, she would see him looking off into the distance, regret in his sea-blue gaze. For someone that helped so many, it seemed as though nothing could dull the pain in his fragile heart. Naruto noticed her staring, and she quickly got back to work. For some reason, Susumaru loved this. Long ago, she used to help her mother in the garden. She had forgotten those times, only recently remembering. She had been the youngest of three, an annoying, brash, and adventurous girl that never listened to her parents. In that time, their country had begun opening its borders to the Western world, ending a 2-century-long isolationist policy. After that, advancements quickly spread to Japan, and she'd been too caught up in all the wonder to listen to her parents. She'd been rebellious, a careless teen that wanted to leave the old ways behind. She began going against the wishes of her family, going to places she wasn't supposed to go. And one night, against the wishes of her father, she ran away despite their warnings, and it cost Susumaru her humanity, and the lives of those dearest to her. She clenched her fists. "I'll atone for it all," Susumaru promised. "And maybe someday, I might see you again, Mom, Dad. If only for a moment. To say, I'm sorry." Vigor renewed, she continued her work in the garden. It had to be perfect. Naruto had given her a second chance, an opportunity to do some good. Making sure this place was well kept was the least she could do for him. So she worked and worked until every area of the garden was touched on. Susumaru looked to him once more. Still lounging on a bench, a black cat sat on his lap, purring with delight as Naruto gently stroked its fur. She smirked, an idea coming to mind. Behind her back, she conjured a temari ball. She gripped it tightly, locking eyes with him. Then she threw it, much faster than normal, but not enough to injure. Naruto didn't blink. He causally lifted his hand and caught her ball without an inkling of effort. He then rose from the bench, his cat protesting the sudden movement. He beamed the ball back at her, this time much faster. Her temari tore through the air like a meteor, whistling in the night. Without a thought, she braced herself and caught it, surprised by the amount of power behind his throw. She was pushed back several meters, feet skidding against the grass. She returned it back to him, doubling her speed. He still caught it with his bare hands, a competitive gleam in his eyes. Excitement fluttered in her stomach as she took a stance, readying herself for a superhuman game of catch. They began slowly, but things soon escalated, so much so that her temari was only a blur. Each time she threw it, he would catch it, sometimes jumping dozens of meters into the sky, and launching it back just as quickly. This continued for a time, until she found herself giggling with delight, returning every toss that came her way. It reminded her so much of playing with her older sister. Something welled up within her, emotions she hadn't felt in decades, and she could not contain the innocent, childlike smile that stretched across her features. Eventually, their game came to an end. Naruto resumed his work, painting those symbols again. By now, the ground was littered with numerous pages of a strange, elegant language she could not discern. Naruto then called to her. She approached, sitting down beside the blonde doctor. Immediately, his cat moved to her side, snuggling against her orange kimono, which he had bought for her, replacing her old one. "Huh. Kimiko likes you." He looked genuinely surprised. "She normally runs away from anyone that isn't me or Yuichiro." Well, I've always loved animals. Susumaru reached out to stroke Kimiko's black fur. At least, I've just remembered that I do. Naruto tilted his head. Your memories are still coming back? Yeah. Susumaru nodded, looking to the sky. It's kind of strange to see how much I've changed since becoming a demon. I mean, I'm still the same person, somehow. But I'd forgotten so much about myself that I might as well be someone else. If you asked me, he said, that doesn't matter. It's who you are going forward that matters. She remained silent, considering his words. In a way, he was right. But it was still hard not to think of all the terrible things she did over the past 30 years. Hey, Susumaru began. She fidgeted, clasping her hands in front of her kimono. Thanks for that. For what? For throwing this with me, she answered, summoning her Tamari. You promised, and you kept that promise. I know it seems dumb, but it really means a lot to me. Naruto waved her off. Don't worry about it. I needed to get up after sitting for so long, anyway. Susumaru glanced at the pages of calligraphy he had been creating. They almost looked like talismans, something a few demons were capable of producing. A type of blood demon art, they allowed demons to perform unique feats, simply by writing symbols on pieces of paper. She wanted to ask, but refrained from doing so, turning to the clinic. Yuichiro had just opened the door. He held a bag and a box of medical supplies. His hair was much shorter now, and the turquoise tint that defined his obsidian curls were much more pronounced. Despite his missing arm, he moved with confidence, approaching both of them. I'm heading out, the teen said. I changed both of the kids' bandages before they went to bed, and I restocked all the supplies. Thanks, Yui. Naruto reached out to tousle the shorter teen's hair. What would I ever do without you? Yuichiro protested, glaring as Naruto finally removed his hand. You'd be perfectly fine without me. You're just too lazy to do all the work on your own. Naruto gave a sheepish smile, crossing his arms. You know, I wouldn't mind if you stayed over for a few more days. I know you wouldn't, he answered. But I'll be fine. There haven't been any more attacks since that day. Plus, I'll be in a well-lit, crowded street. Fine, Naruto said, conceding. See you tomorrow, then. Yuichiro smiled a bit, a rare sight to behold. Later, sensei. Before leaving, he briefly looked at Susumaru, barely acknowledging her presence as he began walking through the garden and toward the exit. I get the feeling that he doesn't like me, she remarked bluntly, stating the obvious. Naruto continued writing. Don't worry about him. It takes a while for him to warm up to people. You'll see. He's very kind once you get to know him. A demon did that to his arm, she ventured. Naruto did not deny this fact, nodding. Then I don't blame him for feeling uncomfortable around me. You're sure he'll be safe going out tonight? I wouldn't be too worried. He grinned. I have a clone following him right now, just in case. A clone? She looked confused, wondering what he was talking about. Anyway, I have a question, Naruto said, changing the subject. She turned to him, curious. Do you know who was responsible for attacking all those people? Susumaru stiffened. The aura of the crime scene returned to her, filling her mind with dread. She didn't know exactly who it was, but it had smelled heavily of Muzan's blood. I don't know specifically, she said quietly. But I think it was a member of the 12 Kizuki. Yes, she knew. She knew that she wasn't a member of the 12. The realization struck a few days ago, after hours of deliberation. As her memories returned, she remembered the demon that turned her. Not Muzan, as she'd once believed, but someone else. She recalled the number that had been etched into his eye, a distinct number 2. An upper moon, to be exact. She had not seen him since that day, and the more she thought about it, the more its sense made. The numbers corresponded with their rank. And after looking in the mirror and finding no such number, the truth became clear. What a fool she was. For years she had been at his beck and call, actually believing she was important to Muzan. But he'd just been using her. She'd just been a tool to him. 12 Kizuki? Naruto was certain he had heard that name. Tamayo must have mentioned them before. They're important, aren't they? Very, Susumaru answered. They're the 12 most powerful demons. They serve directly under him. She did not mention Musen's name, and Naruto understood why. The curse. Another thing Tamayo had explained to him. Naruto had never encountered that man, nor did he desire to. He had other matters to attend to, more important things at hand. Besides, the Demon Slayer Corps was already on the job. This was their fight, not his. He wasn't allied with them in any way, and he had only met a handful of them. But based on the few he'd interacted with, they seemed to be highly capable warriors. The image of a water-themed slayer flashed before his eyes. Naruto shook the thought from his mind. He had other responsibilities. He had to return home. He had to save his world from the tyranny of his best friend. While he was deep in thought, Susumaru glanced at him once more, eyes roaming his features, straying far lower than they should have. Naruto was wearing a loose-fitting shirt. Unbuttoned at the collar, it exposed his neck and some of his muscled chest. Even beneath such comfortable clothes, his defined body was difficult to ignore. And the scent of his blood was even harder to resist. It had been some time since she first consumed his blood, since her moment of weakness upon entering his clinic that day. But the more time she spent with him, the more her desire for other humans waned. He seemed to notice, because he turned her. "You've gone a while without blood, haven't you?" Naruto said casually. "Here." He leaned closer, rolling up his sleeve. She hesitated, a quiver running through her. As much as she liked to believe she had changed, she was still a demon, still beholden to certain biological instincts. Are you sure? It's been 2 days, and you haven't done anything to make me believe you were lying when you agreed to my conditions." He smiled gently. "Go on. I don't mind." "Oh, okay." Susumaru scooted closer, the cat at her side scurrying away. Her fangs lengthened, his scent filling her senses. He lifted his forearm to her, and she sank her teeth into his flesh. A tremor racked her body, her very being. His temperate blood filled her mouth, rushing like an endless river. She drank slowly and with a purpose, face flushing, eyes closing. She savored his taste, savored the pleasant feeling that came with this act, the warmth that spread to every portion of her body. It lasted only a few moments, but to her, it felt like an eternity. His blood wasn't like Musen's. It wasn't harsh, nor did it force its will upon her. It almost felt kind. Finally, she pulled away. Like that day, there was no disgust in his eyes. No judgment at all. Even then, she could see the wound she'd given him begin to heal. Not as fast as a demon, but still impressive, nonetheless. Naruma Tokyo. Ozaki yawned, stretching her arms to the night sky. Her crows squawked incessantly upon her shoulder, and she reached down to scratch its adorable little head. Though the moon glinted from above, the lamps in the city streets seemed even brighter. Being from the countryside, the city always amazed her. The buildings were taller, made of concrete and brick. The people were also different, walking about with both traditional and modern attire. She looked around with wide eyes, taking in everything she could. It wasn't often that she was called upon for missions in Tokyo. Most of her assignments involved incidents outside metropolitan areas. So, whenever she found herself here, she took the time to experience as much as she could before returning to headquarters. "Does your crow ever shut up?" Murata asked, rubbing his temples. The taller demon slayer walked beside her. Along with their standard uniform, he wore a black haori, his Nichiren blade hidden away. Ozaki's mood fell, once again reminded that he was with her. She had been so lost in the scenery that she forgot they were both assigned to this mission. She didn't hate Murata, not really. He seemed like a decent guy, as well as a fine demon slayer. But she preferred working on cases alone. They barely knew each other, too. Outside of formal meetings with the higher-ups, she hardly ever spoke to him. "He's just excited to see me, that's all," Ozaki explained. She brushed strands of onyx hair from her face, frowning. Ever since childhood, her hair had always been a bother. No matter what she did, it always looked messy, with stray locks sticking out in random places. "All right, Sora. You can go now. We got the message. As if understanding her words, the crow took off into the sky, squawking loudly. Ozaki stifled a laugh, reminded of how much she loved that little bird. Her crow had arrived to inform them of an upcoming gathering of demon slayers ranked Kano and above. What's the plan now? Murata asked. After investigating for hours, they decided to take a break. They stopped by one of the food stands still open and ordered 2 bowls of ramen. Slurping the delicious noodles, Ozaki paused to think. Before deciding on anything, let's review what we know. She placed her bowl on the table. First, we know that for the past year, demon attacks in Nerima have been disproportionately low, at least compared to other parts of Tokyo. I wonder why that is, said Murata, taking a bite. I mean, in a crowded city like Tokyo, it's strange to think there is a place where demon activity is so far removed from other areas. Of course, most demons attack isolated villages, but nearly 0 attacks in a span of 12 months? That's completely unheard of. Ozaki nodded. Exactly. Even more interesting is that, in just the past few days, demon activity has spiked significantly. And most of the victims were male, some of whom are still missing, Murata added, thinking. This attack has me concerned, Ozaki. From what witnesses told me, multiple people died in one night. Normally, demons pick off 1 or 2 targets at once. But this attack involved 10 people. He closed his eyes, then sighed. This might take longer than we thought. In that case, Ozaki began, finishing her bowl, since we'll be here for a while, let's get a place to stay. Murata rubbed his hair, blushing. You mean, both of us? She shrugged and grabbed her sword. Why not? We'll look around for a few more hours before calling it a night. She paid for their meal, smirking. Just don't think of doing anything while I sleep, or you'll get a sword through the eye. Murata shuddered at the thought. Though cute and seemingly delicate, Ozaki was no pushover. They were the same rank, after all. Wouldn't dream of it. Picking up his things, Murata moved to her side, and they continued their investigation for a little while longer. The next day, Yuichiro made sure he arrived on time. He had stayed up much later than usual, having been invited to a little get-together with his neighbors. Admittedly, it wasn't his brightest idea to stay so long, but he still had fun. For the longest time, Naruto had encouraged him to make friends with other people his age. I won't be here forever, Yuichiro, Naruto had said. Begrudgingly, he accepted the suggestion, and slowly but surely, he started coming out of his shell. During his first year with Naruto, Yuichiro had been glued to him, following him around, ever willing to repay him for saving his life. But Naruto desired nothing in return. The thought of such kindness always made him feel guilty. Naruto was the older brother he never had. Before Yuichiro met him, it had been just him and his younger twin. Both of their parents had died before they turned 11, leaving them to fend for themselves. Yuichiro frowned. He had been so cruel to Michiro, the opposite of what Naruto was to him. And of all the regrets he had in this world, it was the possibility of never getting to see his brother again, of never apologizing for being so cold and heartless, that left him in a state of sadness. He began the day by opening the curtains, allowing golden rays of light to fill the clinic. He then went to check Naruto's 3 patients. They had been here for over 2 days, steadily recovering from their injuries. Entering the room, he was greeted by the sight of Jiro, watching over his children. The man no longer had a bandage on his head, and his concussion was a thing of the past, courtesy of Naruto's healing abilities. His children were also awake, chatting with their father. They were still wrapped in bandages, but the speed at which they had recovered was astonishing. Once at death's door, both of them almost seemed ready to be discharged. Jiro smiled once he approached. Ah, Yuichiro. Good morning. Good morning, Jiro. I trust your night was fine? Yes, he replied, glancing at his children. They slept well, without a care in the world. I'm glad, Yuichiro replied. One of the kids waved to him, which he kindly returned. Based on their condition, I think they might be set to leave in a few days. Jiro nodded. It's almost hard to believe. He smiled softly. I don't have the words to express my gratitude. You and the doctor have done so much for me and my family. Even if I sold everything I owned, it would never be enough to repay you. There's no need for any of that, Yuichiro assured, lips twitching upward. We don't do this for attention, or even praise. I know, said the man. He paused, adding, even though my wife is gone, even though the world seems a bit darker, I'm still grateful for meeting you too. I'm grateful for meeting you too, Jiro. It was Naruto. He entered the room with his usually smile, a stethoscope around his neck. The kids grew excited once they saw him, despite the tired look in his eyes. After all, he continued, your cooking is way better than mine. I really enjoyed the meal you made the other day. It's the least I could do. Jiro laughed a bit. And hey, I still want you to come to my restaurant someday. I'll make you the largest bowl of ramen in the world, for free. Naruto chuckled. I'd like that, Jiro, he said, greeting each child with a fist bump. Hey, Keiko. Hey, Kuro. You guys seem lively today. Anything exciting happen? Kuro, the younger brother, beamed. Me and my sister just decided. Naruto arched a brow. Decided what? We decided that we want to be doctors when we grow up, Keiko explained, eyes bright. Just like you. Really? He asked, playfully unconvinced. Are you sure? It's going to be a lot of hard work, you know. Yeah, we know, Keiko assured. But we want to help people, like you and Yuichiro do. Naruto glanced at his student, who looked on with amusement. Well then, he said. I won't stop you too. In fact, I'm rooting for you. See, I'm not the smartest person in the world, but somehow, I still managed to learn. I'm sure both of you will be fine doctors. He ruffled each child's hair, then proceeded with his assessment. He checked their lungs and heart with his stethoscope. He then moved on to assess their skin and injuries, discreetly healing whatever wounds remained with a pulse of chakra. They were practically ready to be discharged, but he wanted Keiko to stay a bit longer, so she could grow more accustomed to using crutches and her prosthetic limb. Stepping back for a bit, he watched them chat with Yuichiro. Naruto crossed his arms. He looked to Jiro, looked to the two children already laughing and giggling after such a tragedy. They didn't deserve to suffer such a thing. They had lost their mother, their home, and many others had died in this event. Naruto sighed a long, heavy sigh as he moved to wash his hands. Normally, he didn't get involved. The demon slayers were capable of solving these types of issues. But this time, he planned to find the demon that started this whole fiasco, whether they were a member of the 12 Kizuki or not. Brat. What is it, Kurama? You're getting too attached. Attached? Attached to what? He inquired, walking down the stairs to the basement. 2 rooms were before him. In one of them, Susumaru was sleeping. In the other, his project was waiting for him. To this world, I mean. Naruto paused at a black door. He took a deep breath, clenching his fists. I'm not a puppet, you know. I can't not feel for these people. This world, just like ours, is filled with so much pain and suffering. I'm well aware, Naruto. Who do you think gives you your power of empathy? You think I cannot feel the negative emotions around us? Sorry, he replied softly. I didn't mean to snap at you. I know. But I will remind you once more, don't forget what's at stake here. Yeah, Naruto said, frowning. I have to get back home before he becomes too powerful to oppose. Precisely, spoke the Biju. You already do enough with the clinic. Remember, you can't save everyone. Focus on your goal. Is that supposed to encourage me, Kurama? Naruto asked with a tired smile. That's the worst pep talk I've ever had. Damn brat. Did you expect a hug, or something? Nah. Naruto placed his palm on the door. I actually prefer your bluntness. He sent a stream of chakra through the door. Instantly, a pattern of seals appeared, glowing brightly in the darkened hall. Naruto released another burst of energy, and the door finally opened, revealing a room much bigger than any other in the house. Inside, Fuinjutsu arrays decorated every corner. The room was completely empty, save for the 6 clones sitting in a circle. They each had their eyes closed, and they were shirtless. Written upon their bodies were seals, each one different, each one more complex than the ones already etched into the walls. Seals upon seals, as intricate as they were numerous. This was what he had been working on for the past 3 years. Away back home, Naruto paused to inspect his work. He studied the numerous symbols on the floors, the walls, and on the very bodies of his clones. During his training trip with Jiraiya, he had devoted himself to the study of Fuinjutsu, given access to a portion of the 4th Hokage's notes. Of course, he was by no means the greatest sealing master to ever live, but with his limited knowledge and the vast amounts of chakra Kurama provided, Naruto was closer than ever to returning to the elemental nations. His clones had their arms outstretched, channeling chakra into a small rip in the space between them. This spatial tear was the beginnings of a portal, the same kind that had sent him careening into another dimension. However, it was too small for him to pass through. Barely the width of the eye of a needle, his gate, as he'd called it, was far from ready to use. Every day, he supplied incredible amounts of chakra just to keep it open. If he and Kurama faltered even for one moment, his way home would begin to close, and hours upon hours of progress would be lost. He'd been doing this for months, constantly transferring chakra to his clones, and having them sustain this small opening. It was tiring work, to say the least, and Yuichiro seemed to be taking notice of his recent bouts of fatigue. Unfortunately, this was the most he had gotten the gate to open. Despite the sheer amount of chakra he transmitted, this tiny portal had yet to widen significantly. Naruto stifled a yawn, stroking his chin. Last night, while watching over Susumaru, he had been working on sealing arrays, hoping that a new addition, a new pattern, would stimulate this stagnant portal. Holding his new sealing concepts, Naruto moved closer to his clones. "You think it'll work?" he asked. "Your formula is a bit shaky, but I believe this new addition will accelerate the portal's expansion." Thankfully, he also had Kurama who, after being sealed into Mito and Kushina Uzumaki, knew a thing or two about Fuinjutsu. Naruto clasped his hands together. "All right. Let's begin." He had dozens of new sealing arrays to add to the room. In essence, he was going to be here for a while. Evening. For a moment, Ozaki thought she felt something. A rush of warmth tingled down her spine, bringing with it a feeling she could not explain. It was almost like a shockwave of energy had passed through her, through the entire district, in fact. Even the street lights were affected, flickering on and off, reacting to this strange surge of power. She paused, staring ahead curiously. "You okay?" asked Murata. His arms were crossed, a single brow raised. "I could have sworn I felt a..." She paused and shook her head. "No, it's nothing." Murata shrugged, proceeding onward. After spending most of their morning resting at an inn, she and Murata set out once more. Now, it was nearing sunset. They had been at this since the afternoon, asking around for information concerning the recent demon attack. Eventually, they found themselves at the scene of the incident. Even though they'd been here yesterday, the sheer destruction still shocked them. A whole city block had been affected. Large claw marks could be seen upon ruined buildings, even on the ground, etched into the dirt. No matter what you believed, there was no denying that this was an abnormal event. People living in the city were less spiritual, less superstitious, than their rural counterparts. Even then, as they combed through the streets, they heard whispers of demons uttered from the lips of, otherwise rational, urban residents. The area of the attack was silent. Fewer people walked the streets, especially as the evening came and the sun began to set. Officers were still stationed at the scene, and a few others worked to remove whatever debris was left. After asking around to no avail, they finally decided to speak to an officer. The Demon Slayer Corps was not officially recognized by the Japanese government. As a result, they did their best to steer clear of law enforcement, lest they interfere with their missions. But in this case, they were desperate for more information, and interacting with the police was their final option. "You're travelers, huh?" said the officer, Baton at his side. "And you're wondering what happened here?" Making sure his sword was hidden, Murata nodded. Yeah? You see, Ozaki is a writer and he glanced over to his companion, silently begging for help. I create fictional stories based on real-world events, events that blur the line between reality and fantasy. The lie flowed from Ozaki's lips, smooth and effortless. If possible, could you tell me more about what happened? The officer rubbed his balding scalp. I couldn't tell you, honestly. I wasn't on duty that night. Both demon slayers seemed to deflate. However, a buddy of mine was. He saw the initial scene, all the bodies, everything. He mentioned that a doctor was there as well. In fact, he's pretty famous around here. Dr. Uzumaki. He's been treating those that were injured that night. If you want more information, he's your guy. Murata nodded, glad they had gotten something. Where can we find this doctor? The older man pointed north. 1 kilometer or so that way. Keep on straight. Make a right, then a left. He has a really nice garden. You can't miss it. Both of them dipped their heads. Thank you, sir, Ozaki said before they turned to leave. No problem, the officer replied. You two be careful. With new information in mind, Murata led the way. They moved on in relative silence, even as the sun began to set. Unconsciously, their hands were on the hilts of their blades, ever ready for an attack. And though she had been a demon slayer for 3 years, her heart still pounded when night fell, bringing with it memories of a time she never wanted to remember. Hey Murata? He glanced at her. Yeah? Why did you become a demon slayer? Murata rubbed his dark mane, a habit of his. Well, I became a demon slayer to protect people. He took a deep breath, eyes distant. My family, they were all killed. I wasn't there to save them, so I try my hardest to be there for anyone who needs help. Ozaki smiled a bit. Murata was a much better person than she was. I'm glad you didn't see them die, she whispered. I wasn't so fortunate. What happened? He asked gently. The grip around her sword tightened. My brother hid me away when a demon attacked my family. I have very good hearing, you see. And I could hear everything, the screams of my mother, my father, and my brother. I'll never forget it. Never. That's why, she said through gritted teeth. That's why I'll never stop until every demon is dead. This is my desire, my one reason for becoming a demon slayer. The passion in her gaze was so intense, Murata didn't know what to say. Ozaki was normally sweet and meek when not on a mission. But here, she seemed like an entirely different person. However, he did not judge her for her anger. Well, everyone has their reasons. And I don't think any reason is better or worse. As long as we defeat them, everyone's motivation is valid, he offered. Ozaki seemed to agree, but she remained silent, eyes straight ahead as they neared this Dr. Uzumaki's clinic. With night falling, Susumaru found herself in the garden once again. It was a cloudy evening, so she could come out a bit earlier than usual. Surprisingly, she had slept the whole day. She hadn't seen Naruto yet either. Normally, he would be out, watching over her long into the night. She wondered when he even had the time to rest, considering the fact that he ran the clinic and kept her company at the same time. She sat at that same bench, reading a book he had gotten her. Kimiko was next her, curled up in her lap, purring. Truly, she hadn't felt this at peace in ages. No worries. No needing to please Muzan. No constant complaints of being filthy from Yaiba. She could just be in the moment. For once, she could enjoy looking at the clouds above. The tranquility was broken when Yuichiro opened the door. Like before, he was done for the day. He had a bag strewn around his shoulders. And the instant he locked eyes with her, his gaze narrowed. He kept his distance, walking past her without a word. She wasn't offended. He had every right to be wary of her. But despite his behavior, Susumaru still raised her voice. Where's Naruto? She asked. The teen paused. He didn't turn to face her. He's in the basement, Yuichiro stated. Sometimes he goes there to work on certain projects. Oh. Her face fell. He won't be coming out tonight? Maybe. Maybe not. But trust me, he's still in watching you. He pointed to various sections of the garden. See those symbols over there? Susumaru searched until she found what he was referring to, noticing for the first time. I don't know how they work, but he said something about them being security seals. Somehow, they alert him to people entering or leaving the clinic. He crossed his arms. So don't even think of escaping, because he'll know. Susumaru looked on, fascinated. The more she learned about Naruto, the less she believed he was entirely human. Some of the things he could do were comparable to a blood demon art. And one more thing, Yuichiro said. Don't get too attached to him. She froze. What are you? The closer you get to him, the harder it's going to be when he finally leaves. Yuichiro shook his head, frowning. Why am I even telling you this? He murmured, making his way out of the garden without another word. When he finally leaves. She pondered those words, silently watching the sky as the moon began to rise. Later. You're sure that's a demon? Asked Murata, skeptical. Hidden behind the walls of the clinic, Ozaki nodded. They had arrived moments ago, having followed the officer's directions. At first, their intention had been to ask permission to enter, but that all changed the instant they saw a woman sitting in the garden. I'm sure, Murata, Ozaki whispered. I told you, didn't I? My hearing is more heightened than most. So, a demon's heart rate is much slower than a human's, much, much slower. And there's a certain sound it makes, a soft yet powerful sound, she explained. That's the first thing I heard when I saw her. Murata looked on with a mixture of amazement and bewilderment. But honestly, he wasn't that surprised. He'd heard that some people could smell demons too. Okay, what's the plan? Ozaki unsheathed her blade, eyes narrowed. We kill her, of course. She heard their footsteps before the gates burst open. Shit! Susumaru ducked as a sword sailed over her head, glinting in the night. Eyes widening, she quickly grabbed Kimiko and jumped to safety, landing in front of the pond. The bench itself had been split in two, just moments after she escaped. Standing before her were two demon slayers. Just my luck. Wielding their katanas, they encircled her, eyes burning fiercely. She set Kimiko on the grass, then raised her hands up. Hey, I know this may sound strange, especially since I'm a demon, but I don't want to fight you guys. They didn't believe her, nor did they listen, because they were on the offensive once again. Ozaki sucked in a breath, filling her lungs with oxygen, life-giving oxygen that strengthened every facet of her being, granting her the power to face any threat. She and Murata moved in a burst speed. Their swords pierced through the air, aimed at the demon before them. Susumaru leapt to the side, avoiding their sudden attack. Not a moment later, Murata was upon her, whispering something about water, before spinning in her direction, an unyielding technique she could barely evade. And just when she thought she avoided it, she felt a terrible pain as her arm was cut cleanly from her body, courtesy of Murata. Blood sprayed from the stump, painting the grass crimson. Whirling around, she felt another blade sink into her stomach, this time, from Ozaki. Susumaru hissed, leaping away once more. Should I fight them? Self-preservation screamed yes, but a voice in the back of mine said no. Because she promised. Their attacks continued, growing faster and more ferocious. She felt her body being riddled with deep cuts, made worse by the force of their swings. Yet she did not retaliate. She dodged as best she could, her mind racing a mile a minute. By now, her clothing, the very ones Naruto had given her, were torn to shreds. A sword sliced her eye, blinding her. She howled, sweeping the female slayer's feet with a kick. Momentarily distracted, the male's sword came swinging toward her neck. Susumaru raised her arm to lessen the blow but lost her other limb in the process. The pain was immense, her breathing panicked. She leapt away once more, losing her footing and landing in the pond. The fish swam away as her blood drained into the water, tinting it red. Even though she was stronger than the average demon slayer, fighting two at once was no easy feat, especially when she was on the defense. Still, perhaps she should have fought back. Perhaps she should have attacked them in return. Anger suddenly flared within, bubbling to the surface. But then, she thought of her promise to Naruto. Her promise to never harm another human, to protect them instead. Her shoulders slumped with defeat. She smiled sadly, watching her reflection in the water. Blood flowed from her wounded eye, her hair ruffled, and her clothes ruined. Her arms were nothing but stumps, and she could hardly support her body weight. As sad as she was to die, at least she tried. At least she kept her word. And she was grateful for the second chance she had been given, no matter how short it was. Both demon slayers loomed over her, their weapons raised. She saw a glint of steel as a blade descended, slicing through the air, ready to sever her head. Susumaru closed her eyes and waited for the end to come. Waited for cold steel to touch her neck. But it never did. Ozaki grunted as her weapon was met by another blade. Not a sword, but a knife. A single knife had halted her swing, halted the execution of this demon. She saw a flash of golden hair before they were blasted back by a gust of wind. She yelped, finding her balance as she and Murata skidded to a stop. The trees swayed and the grass shuddered, shaken by the sudden gale. "You all right?" asked Murata. She looked to her partner, nodding. "Yeah, but what was that?" Their gazes soon found the source of the disruption. A blond man had appeared, seemingly from thin air. He held the demon in his arms, cradling her close to his chest. "I'm sorry," the man whispered. "I should have been here sooner." The demon laughed weakly, relaxing in his arms. "Just what were you doing anyway?" "Messing with a bunch of seals." He looked sheepish. "My new design knocked me out, almost killed me, in fact." "Stupid fox." "I thought he said it would work," he muttered, though he didn't appear to be upset. Susumaru did not understand what he was talking about, but she didn't care. She was just glad that he was here. Naruto turned to the two demon slayers, eyes flashing crimson, but only for a moment. And suddenly, a feeling of terror washed over them. There was an aura about him. It had risen for only a second, but it was enough to make their legs shake. A shiver racked Ozaki's body, a bead of sweat trailing down her temple. She glanced at Murata, who looked even paler than usual. The grip on his sword loosened, and his teeth chattered with fear. She turned her gaze back to the blond man. He was moving, carrying the demon to a spot under a beautiful tree. He placed her down gently, then turned, putting himself between her and their swords. "Is this another demon?" she wondered, then listened. His heart rate was slow, though not like a demon's. But that aura she had sensed, the intimidating power that radiated from him. It was the same thing she had felt earlier, the same energy that had nearly plunged the district into darkness. No. He couldn't be human. No human possessed such presence. She gritted her teeth and stilled her fear. There was no number written on his eye, so he couldn't be one of the 12. "You ready, Ozaki?" asked Murata. It seemed he had recovered as well, his sword aimed forward. She nodded. "Yeah." Ozaki slid into a solid stance. She held her blade in a sideways grip. Naruto rubbed his spiky mane, kunai in one hand. "Wait a minute, guys," he implored. "Can we at least talk about this first?" Murata scowled. "Why would we want to listen to two demons?" Naruto seemed taken aback. He paused, glancing at Susumaru, before chuckling. "You think I'm a demon?" They said nothing, moving forward. Naruto sighed. "Fine then. Don't listen." He shifted into a stance of his own, chakra flaring. Ozaki sucked in another breath. She felt a sudden surge of energy, fueled by the very air around her. Her lungs expanded. Her arteries grew. And her muscles bulged. Water breathing first form, drop ripple thrust. She shot forward, the world around her blurring out of focus. Only her target could be seen, watching her with expectant eyes. She closed the distance between them in moments, but he was not surprised. He deflected her strike with a kunai, a painful ring filling the night sky. Murata was upon him an instant later. He swung his sword with deadly force. Naruto ducked beneath the slash, avoiding an attack that would have taken his head off. Grinning, he parried Ozaki's second thrust. And in one smooth motion, his elbow came careening into Murata's chest. A pained grunt escaped his lips, and he was thrown back. Naruto moved forward, thrusting his kunai toward Ozaki, a faint glow surrounding his weapon. First form, water surface slash. She deflected his blade with enough force to release sparks. He almost seemed impressed. And she advanced once more, engaging him in close combat. With all the years of training at her fingertips, she began with a targeted series of slashes, each one aimed to tear muscle, split bone, and sever limbs. But like earlier, he dodged every attack that came his way. He leaned slightly with every swing, avoiding her blade by a hair. He was nimble, free, almost like air itself, shifting to escape any obstacle. Third form, flowing dance. That was Murata. He was back, joining the fray. His movements mimicked the fluid nature of water, careening and flowing like the tides. Third form, flowing dance. Ozaki switched her technique to the same one as Murata's. And together, they continued the offensive, slashing and slicing with the ferocity few possessed. But despite their best efforts, their opponent was unfazed, ducking and weaving past every movement of their blades. Then, he finally began using his weapon. His hand was a blur as he deflected each and every one of their attacks. The force behind that kunai was immense, inhuman. Ozaki could feel the vibrations running up her arms, rattling the very bones in her body. With a single attack, he knocked both swords from their hands. Murata didn't have time to react as a kick sent him flying into a nearby tree. He didn't get up. Ozaki's eyes widened. She felt a blow to the face, and then a fist plowed into her stomach. Her vision blurred as darkness threatened to overtake her. She fell to her knees, sword landing beside her. Then the fear came, and with it, the sudden realization that she would soon die. She trembled. The battle had been over so quickly. In fact, it seemed as though he could have killed them in an instant if wanted to. He'd only been toying with them, humoring them until he grew bored. Tears stung at her eyes, and she hated the fact that she was starting to cry. But she couldn't stop the tears, nor could she halt the memories of that day, that terrible day when demons had slaughtered her family. Terror and rage filled her being, the same feelings she felt when her brother had hidden her away. The blonde approached her, twirling his kunai. "Will you listen now?" he inquired. Ozaki gritted her teeth. Her brows furrowed. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I will never reason with a demon." She reached for her sword. Naruto blurred and appeared next to her. He landed a single chop to the neck, and her world went black. The girl slumped in the grass, unconscious. Naruto let loose a breath, glancing at her partner. He was out cold as well. He had made sure not to hit them too hard, but still, he had to make sure they were all right. He retrieved both of their swords, observing them with curious eyes. Nichiren blades. The primary weapon of the Demon Slayer Corps, capable of killing demons. He tested one, swinging it. Naruto shrugged, then placed them on the grass. "They're lighter than I expected. Plus, something felt different about these blades. Something familiar. Natural energy, trapped within the steel. He could almost feel his body pulling at it, drawing on it." Susumaru was walking toward him by now, arms wrapped around herself. All her injuries were gone, and no matter how many times he saw it, he was always amazed by a demon's ability to recover from practically any injury. Well, that was quite a mess. Next him, she nodded. They didn't even want to talk. "And they thought I was a demon too?" She smirked. "Well, I didn't think you were human either the first time we met." Susumaru's eyes fell on the tear-stained cheeks of Ozaki. "But I don't think I blame them for feeling this way about demons, about me." Naruto regarded her with a gentle gaze. "They attacked you first, didn't they?" She nodded slowly, and he placed a hand on her shoulder. "They weren't injured by time I arrived, but you were. You didn't hurt them, even as they attacked, aiming to kill." He looked genuinely happy. "You kept your promise." She smiled a bit, crossing her arms. "Of course I did." "I should have been out here with you," he remarked. "Don't worry about that. I'm fine now." Susumaru glanced at her tattered attire. "I'm sorry about ruining the clothes you got for me." "It's all right." Naruto was far from angry about that. There was a more pressing issue at hand. What to do with these two demon slayers? Or in this case, his two new patients. Naruto scooped up the female, then did the same for the male. Hoisting both of them over his shoulders, he made his way to the clinic, Susumaru following closely behind. Naruto could feel his strength returning, steadily. His new sealing array had knocked him unconscious, draining too much chakra too quickly, then releasing a pulse of energy so great that it covered the entire district. It appeared the female demon slayer might have sensed it, judging by the way she looked at him. He would have to be careful next time. And of course, most importantly, he would never listen to Kurama again. Shut up, brat. I'm only kidding, you damn furball. Later, location unknown. Please, please stop. Mikago's mouth watered, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. The boy in her grasp squirmed beneath her hold, but he could not escape. Though she was smaller than him, he was powerless before her. Compared to the strength of a demon, he might as well have been an ant. She pulled him closer, savoring the aroma that flowed from his body. He was young, supple, just the way she liked them. Barely a teenager by the looks of things, the boy's features were pristine, unmarred by time and the hardships of life. His merchi blood filled her nostrils, making her quake with hunger. By now, the boy was crying. Why are you doing this? I'm sorry, she wailed. Even then, a wicked grin was plastered across her face, despite the tears that rolled down her cheeks. I just can't help myself. With a feral growl, her fangs and claws lengthened. She sank her teeth into his throat, his screams of horror filling the night sky. His blood flooded her mouth, and not a single drop was spilled. Then she devoured him utterly and completely, shivering with momentary satisfaction. Not enough, she mused, the thrill of the kill subsiding. It was never enough. Then, from the shadows, a single figure emerged. He possessed long, flowing black hair and a beard. Upon his left eye was a single number 2. He walked with his arms crossed, a smirk on his lips. Must you always play with them beforehand? Rokuro asked, stopping in front of the crouched demon. Mikago looked away, eyes finding the ground. I guess not, she whispered. But where's the fun in that? Lower rank 2 chuckled. Well, to each their own, I suppose? He surveyed the area, observing the bodies that surrounded them. All males. No older than 20 years of age, it seemed. How long has it been since we last saw each other, Mikago? Finally standing up, she twiddled her thumbs nervously. About 10 years, I think. And you've been well? Why, yes, replied the demon. Rokuro leaned against a tree, a lengthy silence descending. Still the same Mikago, I see. Sometimes he wondered how she was rank 4, judging by her strange mannerisms. But looking around, he was reminded why. As timid as she seemed, she was far more gruesome and bloodthirsty than even him. We're waiting for one more, she supplied. Oh? Rokuro glanced her way. You didn't invite just me? How interesting. Just what do you need us for exactly? Mikago's gaze found the ground, but her bloodlust was almost palpable. She shivered with remembrance, as the image of a blond man flashed before her eyes. He was the one human she just had to devour. I need you to help me capture a certain human. A human, you say? Rokuro echoed. A demon slayer? And no. Not one of them. But someone better. As someone who possesses blood so irresistible, all those with merchi pale in comparison. Rokuro crossed his arms once more, a grin stretching across his features. Now I'm curious. But couldn't you just capture this one human on your own? He's strong. I'd say almost as powerful as a Hashira. A Hashira? His eyes widened. And yet he is not a demon slayer? And not that I'm aware of, Mikago said. I've watched him from afar. He doesn't seek out demons to kill, not like they do. But our kind are always drawn to him. And every single time he is attacked, he comes out unscathed. Rokuro stroked his beard. This is intriguing. Most intriguing. Okay, Mikago. Say I help you capture him. What do I get in return? A piece of him, Mikado promised. You may have any part you like. Trust me. It will be worth it. I believe devouring him will provide us with enough power to rival the upper moons. A bellowing laugh escaped Rokuro's lips, echoing through the forest. All right, number 4. I'll humor you. Mikado nodded, an anticipatory glint in her eyes. And finally, the last person appeared. He emerged from the bushes, arms clasped behind his back. Lower rank 6.